Alright, this is gonna be like a quick guide on how to PvP and what stats you should focus on and how to like min-max stuff. Because a lot of people are asking me like how I basically stat my character, what gear I use and stuff like that. So I think it's just easier to explain it like this. Basically what I'm doing is I go full DPS gear, as you can see, with the Time and Years and Wheel of Fate set. The guitar, the element of the guitar is doesn't matter. It's just there for healing, and obviously for me, it's the S40, the S35 Heber Abyss weapon. I think it's probably the best offensively for Astro, and defensively it would be the Hermes weapon, I think, because it gives 15% all resistance. I use Beelzebub as an anime crystal just because it gives 10% reduced damage taken and 10% reduced elemental damage taken. I think in PvP the most important stuff is that you can always rely on self buffs that make you stronger. If it comes like defensively or offensively, doesn't really matter. Self buffs are always better because better than debuffs, because debuffs in PvP usually get cleansed away by let's say, for instance, on Astro the Serena release, or like the set, or like the EMA buff, or like any other like class specific cleanses. Like Bard has a cleanse, Brawler has a cleanse and stuff like that. So I think self buffing is always better because that cannot be cleansed away usually, and the Holy Spirit is always going to be Supreme Sword because the proc is just very strong and you need the proc to kill people. Obviously like 30% Auris mount, and I use the Mistress of the Moonshadow emblem just because I think it's the best emblem that you can use because of the accuracy drop. And yeah, so the most important thing in PvP about defenses are in general that you have like you have the general damage reduction, you have the player damage reduction, and you have the resistances, like the received received damage reduced from each element, and then obviously the pierce one. So first of all, the general damage reduction is capped at 75% in the arena, which means that everything exceeding 75% will not be calculated towards the damage formula, but there are obviously like debuffs that the enemy can stack on you that will reduce your general damage taken, or general damage reduction, which means that you need more than 75% to counteract those debuffs. Usually a good sweet spot would be something like 100% with procs, because at least from what I've tested, that's usually more than enough to just keep the 75% running. Same for the player damage reduction, which is also kept at 75% in PvP in Arena. And currently there's no debuff in the game that reduces the stat, so basically everything above the 75% is useless. But usually you have more than that because of the PvP gear itself giving more than that. But you should not focus extra, like you should not, for instance, roll your face costume to like minus 12% damage taken from players, because it's totally useless in the damage calculations. So the more interesting part right now is the elemental resistances and the elemental pierce resistances and how they work together. So for physical, there's no pierce in the game, and there's no pierce resistances for physical in the game, so we'll just skip that one. That means that all the resistance you have for physical is just the one that you have in here. And for the others, you have these ones for the elements, and these ones are the pierce resistances. Usually in Arena, you have an elemental resistance cap of 80%, which is like, you can imagine it like a hard cap or like a limiter, which means that everything exceeding the number is basically a hidden number, will reduce down to 80%. But for instance, if let's say I have received storm damage reduction 111%, and for instance, somebody can have like a debuff that reduces my storm damage reduction by 30%. I would be still left with 81%, which means that I'm still capped in the arena. I'm still above the 80% cap. So that's also a reason why it's important to have like to like overcap those stats as high as you can, and obviously like as equally as you can, because you don't know what opponent you're facing, like what element he has. But you need to def like everything, and you need to like overcap on every single element in that regard. And then there are abyss weapons in the game that will give you the pierce, the elemental pierce, and how you dev it is with elemental pierce reduction, which the other S35 weapons are for. And usually how it works is that, for instance, you have, let's say 50 elemental pierce, let's say 50 storm pierce, and I have like 111 storm damage reduction. That would mean that you subtract the 50 from the 111 and you're left with 61, which is below the cap. Therefore, you need to counteract it by having abyss weapons in the holy chest that will give me the pierce reduction. For instance, like this one is 37% from storm, which means that from the 50%, I will subtract 37% first, which leaves the opponent with 13% pierce, which would then be subtracted by the 111% that I have, which leaves them with like 98%, which leaves me with 98% res, which is above the 80%, so I'm fine. So I'm basically still above the res cap. So that's how you add those two together, and that's why it's important to have like roughly 150 to 160% all resistance plus like pierce resistance combined in fight, of course, because there are like certain things that proc more resistance, like this one, or like certain other things. To be honest, I don't know all the stuff that procs, but this one for certain procs and gives you more resistance, or like the manual gives you resistance as well. That's why it's very important to have like high resistance plus pierce resistance combined. Yeah, 160% is like a good number, because usually people have like their main weapon, which is like 20%, and if they are crazy, they have like 9 holy chests, which is 54%, which adds up to 74%, and usually you need like 154% to counteract it to be like still at 80, which I think it's self-explanatory. Yeah, that's basically how you calculate all of these things. Nowadays, you obviously focus on full DPS gear because you want to have like a very high damage number, because all of your skills are scaling with your flat damage number, and they usually have a very good scaling. For instance, my astrologer has like very good scaling on all of the skills, which means that even if I hit somebody who is at 80% resistance and I hit him through the 80% resistance, I can still be able to kill him due to the sheer amount of damage that I have. And that's basically the meta in PvP right now, that you just want to stack up as much damage as you can and hit them through the 80% resistance that they have. So basically that 20% of your damage is still enough to threaten lethal on them, which, yeah, is all there is to PvP.